Why was everyone staring at her like she didn't belong there? The metallic clang of her wrench echoed across the flight line, bouncing between hangars and the desert wind. Rachel Moore didn't look up. She just kept cleaning the Apache's gun barrel, slow, steady, precise. The afternoon sun burned the metal till it shimmered like molten glass, but her hands didn't falter. They moved with that strange rhythm of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. "Hey, lady, the coffee shop, across the street." The voice came from behind her, dripping with amusement. Captain Harris. His laughter carried over the tarmac, sharp and careless. A few mechanics chuckled. Rachel said nothing. Just shifted her rag, wiped another inch of the gun, and let the sound of the wind swallow his mockery. To them, she was nobody, some misplaced logistics worker who'd drawn a maintenance slot she didn't deserve. A woman cleaning a weapon she couldn't possibly understand. "Just clean it," Harris added, leaning out of the cockpit. "Don't touch what you don't understand." The sun caught the edge of her sleeve then, lifting it just enough to expose a faded patch, 2 crossed daggers and a coiled viper. Someone noticed. The laughter died mid-breath. No one wore that emblem unless they'd been part of that mission, Operation Black Sand. A classified nightmare where most didn't make it home. Only one did. Rachel kept wiping, her eyes calm, her movements exact. She didn't flinch under their stares, didn't explain, didn't remind them that every machine they trusted their lives to was built, maintained, and saved by hands like hers. The rag moved again. The metal gleamed. And just for a moment the desert went silent like it was holding its breath. No one knew who she really was, not yet. The base was alive in a way only military installations in hostile regions could be, 1,000 small sounds forming a rhythm of readiness. Helicopter rotors slicing the heat, radios crackling, steel boots on concrete, and over all of it the oppressive hum of desert wind, thick with sand and secrets. Rachel had been there only 3 days, long enough for the whispers to start. She wasn't pretty in the conventional way. No makeup, hair tied back, sunburn on her neck. A small frame that looked more suited for an office than a war zone. Her uniform was regulation but plain, no patches except the standard insignia, no flashy unit markings. She moved quietly, head down, always working. To them, she looked like background noise. "She's from logistics," one of the mechanics muttered that morning. "Probably got dumped here by mistake." "Yeah," another added with a smirk, "until she breaks something expensive." The joke spread like they all do when boredom meets ego. By lunch, half the hangar had an opinion about the new transfer. By dinner, they decided she was decoration. But some things can't be hidden forever. That first evening, Rachel stood by the Apache's landing gear, checking a hydraulic line. The desert light was fading, painting everything in rust and gold. A wiry technician with a chipped tooth leaned against a supply crate, watching her work. "They sent us a girl to do the cleaning," he said loudly. "How thoughtful." A few heads turned, someone snickered. Rachel said nothing, just pressed the gauge, checked the pressure, and adjusted the line by exactly half a rotation. The motion was smooth, efficient, unhurried. The kind of efficiency that didn't come from manuals but from memory, from survival. "Careful," the wiry one added, "don't break a nail." The laughter rolled again. Rachel placed the wrench down gently, inspected her work, then stepped away. No reaction, no defense, just silence. That silence bothered them more than anger ever could. Later that night she sat alone in the mess hall. A tray untouched before her, stale bread, cold potatoes, overcooked vegetables. Around her the air buzzed with noise. Pilots boasting, technicians complaining, laughter spilling like cheap beer. At the next table, a young officer smirked. "Hey, you planning to clean guns or polish your nails over there?" The others roared. Captain Harris was among them, perfect jawline, metal-slick confidence, arrogance wrapped in a flight suit. He didn't join the laughter this time, just watched her, studied her. Rachel set her fork down, stood, and left without a word. Her steps were even, her posture calm. The laughter followed her out, but it felt weaker now, like they all sensed something they couldn't name. "Probably quits tomorrow," someone muttered. They didn't know Rachel Moore didn't quit anything. Not anymore. The next morning she was back before sunrise. The desert sky glowed in pale pinks and silvers, the air still cool before the heat returned. She walked the tarmac alone, her boots whispering over concrete. Her hand brushed the Apache's skin, the same one she'd cleaned the day before. Machines remembered things, she believed, the way soldiers did, the way she did. By the time the others arrived, she was already halfway through a systems check. The sun climbed. Sweat rolled down her neck, but she worked as if the world beyond that machine didn't exist. "Still here," Harris called out, descending from the tower. She didn't answer. He approached, boots echoing, stopped a few feet away. "You think you belong here?" Her gaze rose, steady, unreadable. Brown eyes that looked through him rather than at him. "I'm just doing my job," she said simply. Something in her tone, quiet, restrained, landed heavier than any argument. Harris blinked, thrown off balance for half a second. Then his smirk returned. "Just make sure you don't touch what you can't fix." Rachel nodded once, a motion so controlled it almost looked like respect. Then she returned to her checklist. That night a storm rolled across the desert, not rain but wind, the kind that carried grit sharp enough to scrape paint. The hangar doors rattled. Equipment covers flapped. The technicians huddled inside, drinking, playing cards, anything to drown the monotony. Rachel stayed outside. The Apache gleamed under floodlights, half disassembled. She worked through the storm, wiping down each component like she was caring for something alive. The wind whipped her hair across her face. Her sleeves fluttered. And for a moment the patch, that viper coiled around two blades, caught the light again. Inside the hangar, the young technician with the nervous habit saw it. His breath caught. He'd seen that emblem before. Not in manuals, in declassified fragments, in legends whispered between deployments about the woman who'd held a fire base alone when her team was overrun. The one they called Night Viper. But that couldn't be her, could it? He watched as she knelt beside the M230 chain gun, checking every link of the feed system, every housing screw. She wasn't just cleaning, she was inspecting the way a sniper checks a rifle, slow, methodical, reverent. Each movement said this is life or death. When the wind died, he realized he'd been holding his breath. A week passed. The teasing faded into uneasy quiet. Nobody said much to her now. Not out of respect, not yet, but because they didn't understand her. She didn't socialize, didn't join in jokes, just worked, ate, and disappeared. But whispers have gravity. One afternoon, while unloading heavy supply crates, her sleeve tore again, this time completely, exposing the patch for everyone to see. The laughter that had started died quick, leaving a stunned silence. Captain Harris was the first to speak, his tone uncertain. "Where'd you get that patch?" Rachel didn't look up. It was issued. No one said another word. That night a photo slipped from her pocket, a worn, creased picture of a younger Rachel standing beside a Humvee, arms slung around another soldier. Dust-covered smiles, exhaustion in their eyes. Behind them, a base that didn't officially exist. Firebase Artemis. The nervous young technician bent to pick it up before she could. Their fingers brushed for a fraction of a second. He saw it clearly, the sandbags, the worn uniforms, the insignia. His stomach dropped. That outpost had been annihilated years ago, all KIA except one. When he handed it back, his hands were shaking. Rachel tucked it away without a word. But for the first time, her composure cracked, barely, like a hairline fracture no one else could see. Her thumb lingered on the photo before she slid it into her pocket. Later she sat alone in the dark outside the hangar. The air still smelled of oil and burnt sand. Somewhere far off, engines murmured. She looked at her hands, small, steady, scarred, and thought about how easy it was for people to mistake quiet for weakness. They didn't know what silence cost. They didn't know what she'd carried out of black sand, or what she'd left behind there. She exhaled slowly, watching the breath turn to vapor in the cooling air. Then she spoke to no one in particular, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not here to prove anything." Her gaze drifted toward the horizon where the first traces of dawn began to form. "I'm just here to keep them flying." The desert answered with silence. And for a long time, that silence was enough. Moral reflection soft. Sometimes, the ones who stay quiet aren't avoiding the fight. They're the ones who already survived it. Why did the base commander stop mid-sentence when she walked in? It wasn't authority that followed Rachel Moore around, it was silence. The kind that made even noise-filled rooms shift tone. After a week of uneasy curiosity, people had learned not to laugh too loud when she passed, not to question her work too openly. They didn't know why, only that something about her quiet steadiness made arrogance feel small. The desert had a way of burning false confidence out of people. And Rachel had spent years in deserts. The hangar that morning smelled of hydraulic fluid and hot steel. A generator rattled somewhere in the corner. Rachel crouched by the Apache's nose cone, checking the targeting sensor array, small adjustments, deliberate movements. Captain Harris watched from across the tarmac, arms crossed, Joe said. He told himself he didn't care who she was, but curiosity had a gravity of its own. He couldn't stop noticing how she moved. Not like a recruit, not like a support tech. More like a soldier who'd learned to make every motion count, because wasted seconds once meant body bags. When he finally crossed the distance between them, the air felt heavier. "You ever serve in Afghanistan?" he asked, voice casual but eyes sharp. Rachel didn't look up. "I've been to many places." A simple answer, but her tone carried history, the kind you don't speak of unless you have to. Harris waited, searching her face for something: guilt, fear, bravado. He found none. "Right," he said at last, stepping back. "Well, don't let the mystery keep you from finishing that calibration." Rachel only nodded, tightening one last bolt before packing up her tools. But that night Harris didn't sleep well, because in his dreams he heard the name whispered again, Night Viper, and realized the rumor had weight. The next day, the base prepared for a demonstration. A live fire exercise for visiting brass, the kind of day that could make or break careers. Technicians scrambled, pilots rehearsed checklists, and command wanted perfection. Rachel had no assigned role except assist. No one expected her to be anything more than background support. That suited her just fine. She arrived early, wiping down the Apache's weapon systems, running diagnostics no one had asked for. The others noticed, whispered again, this time not mocking, just unsure. When the alarm blared suddenly, cutting through the morning calm, everyone froze. A system error. The Apache slated for the demonstration showed a firing malfunction, an error code blinking red across the console. If not fixed, it would ground the entire show. Technicians rushed forward, shouting numbers, tossing manuals, blamming circuits. The air was panic and sweat. Captain Harris sprinted from the control tower, barking orders. "Somebody fix that gun, now." Nobody moved. Rachel did. She climbed onto the Apache like she belonged there, no hesitation, no permission asked. Her hands danced over the controls. A twist, a lock, a manual override that shouldn't even have been possible without command access. 4 seconds later, the warning lights went dark. The silence that followed was louder than the alarm had been. "It won't jam when you fire," she said quietly, stepping back down. Her tone was flat, almost bored, as if she'd fixed a paper jam rather than a multi-million-dollar weapon failure. Harris stared at her, For the first time, he didn't see a maintenance worker. He saw a ghost. That evening, the mess hall buzzed with one story: the woman who fixed the impossible. By midnight, the story had grown teeth. She hacked the weapon system. She bypassed security protocols. She's special ops has to be. Rumors moved faster than truth ever could. Rachel ignored them. She ate alone again, the same untouched tray, the same quiet pace. The young technician with the nervous habit watched her from across the room, fingers twitching against his cup. He'd seen the patch, the photograph, the skill. He was starting to piece together the puzzle. He wanted to ask her, "Who are you really?" But how do you question someone who carries silence like armor? The next morning, Harris called her name from the hangar entrance. More a word. She looked up from her notes, wiped her hands, and followed him outside. The heat hit like a wall, 110 degrees and climbing. The senior officer was waiting for them, a veteran with gray stubble, scars running down his left hand, and eyes like someone who'd seen too many body bags zipped closed. He turned as she approached. "You're the one they're all whispering about," he said. His voice was gravel, steady but testing. "Let's see if there's truth to it." He tossed her a sniper rifle, an M17 military issue, scope calibrated for 2,000 meters. "You hit the plate at that range, you earn my respect. Miss it, and maybe people stop pretending you're something special." Harris frowned. "Sir, that's a double-range shot, even trained snipers." "Quiet, Captain," the officer snapped. "Let her speak for herself." Rachel didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. "Hand me the M1007, she said. The officer blinked, the long-range variant, heavier, less forgiving. He nodded once, almost smiling. "All right, Moore, show us what you've got." They drove out to the range, a half-mile stretch of dust and heat. Wind tore across the open desert, whipping sand into swirling ghosts. Targets gleamed at distances most eyes could barely detect. Technicians gathered, pilots stopped their work, the crowd swelled. The officer gestured to the farthest plate. 2,000 meters, you've got one shot." Rachel set down her pack. No theatrics, no warm-ups. She checked the rifle like she'd built it herself. Every click of metal echoed, every movement slow, intentional. She didn't use the wind meter, didn't consult a ballistic app. She just looked at the sky, the sand, the direction of distant gusts, reading the world like a language she'd never forgotten. The crowd grew still, even the wind seemed to pause. She lay prone, shoulders aligned, breathing slowing until the sound of her heartbeat merged with the desert hum. The trigger moved a fraction of a millimeter. The rifle cracked. A heartbeat later, the metallic ping of a perfect hit drifted back across the range. The officer lowered his binoculars, expression unreadable. "Dead center," he said finally. For a moment, no one breathed. Then the whispers began, not mocking now, not doubtful. Something close to awe. Harris stepped forward slowly, hand extended. "Welcome back, Night Viper." Rachel took it, firm grip, steady eyes. Then she turned back toward the Apache, as if the entire world hadn't just shifted around her. She picked up her cloth, began cleaning again. Like nothing had happened. That was when the sirens began to scream. Not training alarms. Real ones. The command center loudspeakers crackled, a voice tight with panic. "Medevac down, medevac down. Grid reference 38 RQT, 12 souls on board taking heavy fire." Everyone froze. Screens lit up across the operations tent, drone footage filled with smoke and chaos. A Blackhawk helicopter lay crippled in a dry riverbed, rotors twisted, smoke billowing. Tiny infrared silhouettes, survivors, moved behind the wreckage, pinned down by approaching hostiles. The commander's voice cut through the noise. "Where are our Apache?" A pause, then. "Two down for maintenance, sir. 3 more at forward base, 30 minutes out. 30 minutes. The soldiers out there had 10, maybe less. Rachel's eyes went to the Apache she just cleaned. Half its systems offline, hydraulics not fully tested, weapons only half loaded. It could fly. Maybe. Don't even think about it, the flight commander barked. That bird's not combat ready. Anyone tries to launch, I'll have you court-martialed. Rachel didn't respond. She was already moving. The moment she climbed into the cockpit, time seemed to slow. Her fingers knew where to go before her mind caught up. Switches flipped, circuits engaged. Warning lights flashed angry red across the console, fuel irregular, targeting offline, weapons partial. More, Harris shouted from the ground. Stop, that's an order. She didn't look down. Court-martial me later, she called back, voice steady. Right now, 12 people are dying. 90 seconds. That's all she needed to breathe life into a machine that shouldn't have moved. Engines coughed, then roared. Rotors spun, slow at first, then faster, a growling rhythm that made the ground tremble. The Apache lifted, unsteady, wounded. But alive. She cleared the tarmac at 50 feet, skimming the desert floor, a streak of dust trailing behind her. Behind her, the base had gone silent. Every eye watched the lone helicopter fade into heat shimmer. Inside the cockpit, Rachel's hands worked faster than thought. Every gauge screamed warnings, but she'd learned which lies to ignore. Machines, like people, could be pushed past their limits if you knew which parts wouldn't break. She spoke softly to the aircraft, as if to calm a frightened animal. Come on, girl, one more flight. The distance to the crash site ticked down, 5 minutes. Too long. She pushed the throttles until the frame shuddered, every rivet vibrating like a heartbeat under stress. Out ahead, smoke rose from the downed helicopter. Figures moved. Muzzle flashes sparked from surrounding ridges. Her jaw tightened. 8 RPG teams at least, trained, coordinated. Not luck, not insurgents, professionals. The first RPG streaked toward her before she even crossed the ridge line. She banked hard left. The rocket passed so close she felt the concussion rock the cockpit. Too close, she muttered. The second came from the opposite side. She dropped the Apache fast, hugging the terrain, the skids skimming rocks, rotor tips slicing sand. Her targeting system was half dead, but instinct took over. She popped up, fired a short burst from the chain gun. The rounds walked up the slope, tearing through the first RPG team. 7 left. She moved again. RPG flares cut through the sky. Bullets hammered the fuselage. One of the rounds hit hydraulic lines, pressure dropping. The controls fought back, sluggish, heavy. Rachel gritted her teeth, forcing the machine into a turn that physics hated. The Apache screamed, metal bending, bolts straining but obeyed. She fired again. Hydra streaked out, detonating 2 more positions. 5 left. Ammo low. The third RPG exploded close enough to light up her cockpit with white heat. The world spun. Warning alarms drowned everything. She was falling. 30 feet, 20, 15. Then calm. Hands steady. Heart slow. She found the one combination that leveled the helicopter. The Apache hovered again, smoke pouring from its side. Through the haze, she saw movement, enemies breaking cover, rushing toward the wounded soldiers. Good. She lined up what was left of her payload, 2 Hellfires. Fired both. 2 blinding blooms of fire erased the nearest squads. The gun rattled its final rounds, 3-second bursts, precise, surgical. Then silence. No ammo, no hydraulics, no hope. She pushed the cyclic forward, diving toward the enemy line. Not a retreat, a run straight through them. Rotor wash hit like a bomb. Sand and debris exploded outward, knocking men off their feet. The helicopter's skids clipped one fighter, sending him spinning. She pulled up just enough to clear the ridge. And in that chaos, a convoy broke over the horizon, armored trucks, medevac birds, backup air support. The survivors were saved. The flight back was agony. Every gauge redlined. Every shudder felt like a heartbeat away from failure. 500 meters from base, the engine seized. The world went silent. Rachel fought the dead controls, aimed for open ground. The Apache hit hard, skidded, through dust and sparks. Then it stopped. The silence afterward was thick enough to choke on. When the rescue crews reached her, she was still strapped in, hands bloody, forehead cut open, but calm. "System shutdown complete," she muttered, flicking one last switch on a helicopter that would never fly again. The young technician was the first to reach her, tears streaking his face. She looked at him once, voice quiet. 12 souls saved. That was all. In the military, souls weren't numbers. They were people. Families, futures. And she'd just given 12 of them back to the world. The crowd parted as the base commander arrived, 2 stars on his shoulder, eyes sharp with recognition. He stopped before her, the desert sun catching the insignia on his chest. "Sergeant First Class Rachel Moore," he said slowly. "Night Viper, Operation Black Sand, August 2019. The words hit the air like thunder. Around them, disbelief turned into awe. Whispers swept the ranks, 47 confirmed kills, Distinguished Service Cross, the only survivor of Firebase Artemis. Rachel stood still, blood drying on her temple, face unreadable. She looked smaller than the legend they suddenly saw, but stronger than all of them combined. Harris stepped forward, pale. I didn't know." She met his eyes. "Now you do." When the medics tried to lead her away, the soldiers saluted, all of them. Not regulation salutes, but the kind reserved for ghosts who'd earned their place in history. Rachel nodded once, accepting the respect without pride. Then turned, walking toward the medical tent with steady steps. The desert wind carried her words softly behind her. "I'm where I need to be." And maybe that was true. Because sometimes heroes don't stand in spotlights. They crouch beside broken machines and make them whole again. Moral reflection soft. Sometimes courage doesn't roar. It hums quietly inside a dying engine and chooses to fly anyway. Why was the hangar silent when she walked in? 3 days had passed since the crash, but the echo of rotor blades still haunted the air. The Apache she'd flown, or rather, the wreck that had once been an Apache, sat on a recovery platform, its hull blackened, its rotors bent like broken wings. Someone had draped a tarp over it, but the wind kept lifting the corners, revealing scars the color of ash. Rachel Moore stepped inside, slow and steady, her left arm wrapped in gauze. The medics had wanted her to rest. She nodded politely, then left the tent at dawn. Some people needed sleep to heal, others needed closure. Her boots crunched over the sand-dusted concrete as she approached the aircraft. Fingers grazed its side, warm, metallic, familiar. "Thank you," she whispered, almost too softly for the word to exist. Behind her, voices murmured, hushed, reverent. Mechanics, pilots, even the ones who'd mocked her. They didn't know whether to speak or salute, so they did neither. They just watched. The woman they'd ridiculed had flown a half-dead machine into hell and brought 12 people back alive. And now, there she was, cleaning what remained of it like she always had. Maybe she wasn't a mystery after all. Maybe she was something rarer. The base commander arrived quietly. 2 stars gleamed on his collar, but he didn't wear them like armor. He stood beside her for a moment, studying the wreckage. "You saved 12 souls," he said. "That's 12 families who'll sleep tonight because of you." Rachel didn't look at him. "Machines should work when they're needed, sir." That one did. He smiled faintly. You call that working? It flew, she said. That's enough. The commander nodded slowly. You know what they're calling you now. Rachel's rag paused mid-wipe. I don't need to know. They're calling you Night Viper again. The real one, not a rumor. He let that hang in the air before adding, Washington's already asking questions. Rachel sighed, a quiet, tired sound. Tell them I'm where I belong. The commander studied her a moment longer. Maybe, but the world doesn't forget people like you more. It just waits for you to show up again. Then he turned and left, boots echoing against the hangar floor. Rachel went back to cleaning. Outside, the base had changed. The laughter was gone, replaced by a strange mix of respect and guilt. The same technicians who'd mocked her now lowered their eyes when she passed. Some tried to apologize. Most didn't know how. The wiry mechanic with the chipped tooth was among them. He stood by the mess hall door that morning, hands stuffed into his pockets, staring at his reflection in the glass. He'd been the first to laugh at her. Now his own face disgusted him. Someone had filmed his taunts. The video had spread faster than wildfire. Maintenance Tech mocks real war hero. The title alone had ruined him. Transfer orders came within 24 hours. Remote supply depot in Alaska. A lifetime of cold and regret. Justice had a way of balancing things quietly. Captain Harris faced his own reckoning. A formal inquiry, a review board, questions he couldn't dodge. His arrogance had blinded him. His pride nearly cost lives. He kept his wings, but his command was gone. Reassigned to transport duty, the military's polite exile. He came to find her before he left. She was in the hangar again, guiding a group of young mechanics through a pre-flight checklist. Her tone was calm, instructive, never condescending. When she noticed him waiting, she finished the sentence she was speaking before turning. Captain, she said. He hesitated, then saluted. It felt wrong, somehow saluting a woman in grease-stained coveralls, but it also felt right. I wanted to say, his voice faltered, I misjudged you. Rachel tilted her head slightly. You judged what you saw. I was wrong. She looked at him for a long time, not coldly, not forgivingly, just honestly. We all are, she said, eventually. Then she returned to her work. The conversation was over. Sometimes forgiveness wasn't words. It was letting someone walk away lighter than they arrived. The woman pilot, with perfect makeup, wasn't spared either. Her comment, thrift store reject, had become infamous online. Within days, every military spouse network, every social page had the clip. She found herself alone, in places that used to welcome her. Whispers followed her now, different from the ones that had followed Rachel, but just as sharp. Shame has a sound. It's the absence of laughter. To her credit, she tried to make things right. She volunteered for sensitivity programs, worked with veterans' charities, spoke softly when she spoke at all. Maybe that's what redemption looks like, not grand gestures, just small, steady efforts. For Rachel, none of that mattered. She didn't seek vindication. She sought purpose. By the end of the week, she was teaching unofficially at first. Young technicians gravitated toward her, drawn by the calm in her voice, the precision of her hands. She taught them how to understand machines the way soldiers understand comrades, by listening. This isn't just metal, she told them one afternoon, tracing a finger along a rotor blade. It's memory. Every scratch is a story. Treat it like one. They listened. They always did. The nervous young technician, the one who'd first seen the patch, who'd picked up her photo, became her shadow. She never said he reminded her of herself, but sometimes when he wasn't looking, she smiled like he did. That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, the hangar doors rolled open. A black SUV pulled up, unmarked, silent. Out stepped a man who didn't need a uniform for people to know who he was. He carried himself like someone used to operating where maps ended. His hair was silver at the edges now, but his movements were still efficient, deliberate. Rachel didn't turn when he approached. She didn't need to. Her shoulders relaxed by a fraction, a tell only one person in the world could read. "Still hiding in plain sight," he said, voice soft, familiar. Rachel kept working, wiping a spotless weapon system. "Someone has to keep these birds alive." He chuckled quietly. "You always did prefer the quiet jobs." He stepped closer, close enough for their connection to be unmistakable. Thomas Moore, her husband, a man whose service record was as redacted as hers. "The Pentagon wants to see you," he said, lowering his voice. "They're talking about redefining selection standards for special operations. They think your demonstration might help." Rachel paused mid-movement. "They want a statement. They want a face, yours." She turned slowly, eyes meeting his. "I'm done being a face. I'm done being a ghost." He studied her for a moment, the desert wind tugging at his collar. "Then maybe they'll let you teach instead. No missions, just passing on what you know." Her gaze drifted back to the Apache. "Maybe," she said. "Let me think about it." The nervous technician approached from the doorway, clutching a folder. His voice wavered. "Ma'am, I found something. Your service record, the parts that aren't classified." Thomas smiled faintly. "Brave of you, son." The technician swallowed hard. "You've saved 347 lives, ma'am. Documented. Who knows how many more." Rachel set her rag down and looked at him, really looked. "You know what matters most." He shook his head. "The saves nobody counts. The ones you make before anything breaks." She handed him her cloth. "Here, your turn. Let me show you the right way." He blinked, startled, then stepped forward. His hands trembled as he wiped the weapon's surface under her watchful eye. "That's it," she murmured. "Gentle, machines respond to respect." The moment was simple, but in its simplicity sacred. Weeks passed, the base changed. The tone, the culture, the silence. Rachel's classes filled with technicians eager to learn, soldiers, even officers, who once thought maintenance was beneath them, now studied the discipline behind her precision. She never raised her voice. She never needed to. She taught with quiet authority, with a conviction that whispered rather than shouted. Sometimes, late at night, she'd stay after everyone left, wiping down tools that were already clean. The hangar lights glowed pale around her. In those moments, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Or something like it. But peace never stays long in places built for war. One evening, Thomas appeared again, same unmarked SUV, same unreadable expression. He carried a manila folder, edges stamped with black bars of classification. "Bad news?" Rachel asked, not looking up from her bench. "Maybe, depends who you ask." He placed the folder on the table. Something came up in the black sand files. Firebase Artemis. The name hit like a ghost. Her hand froze over the tool she was cleaning. "I thought we buried that." "So did I until now." She opened the folder slowly. Inside, satellite images, intercepted messages, and one highlighted name. Her breath stopped. Someone she'd trusted. Someone she'd bled beside. Someone who'd sold them out. "He's alive?" she asked. Thomas nodded. "Running operations in Syria, using the same channels, same networks. People are going to die unless." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Rachel closed the folder, eyes blank. The desert outside seemed suddenly smaller, the air heavier. "I'm not that person anymore," she whispered. Thomas watched her carefully. "No, you're better, smarter, and now you have options." He left her with the folder, but he knew her too well. He knew she wouldn't ignore it. Not forever. That night, the hangar lights stayed on long after curfew. Rachel sat alone, the folder open beside her. The Apache silhouette loomed behind her, a dark guardian, scarred but standing. Her fingers traced the highlighted name again and again, until the paper began to crease. Then she looked up at the stars, beyond the hangar door. 5 years of guilt. 5 years of silence. 5 years believing the past was random, not betrayal. Now she knew. The air felt electric, that moment before a storm when everything holds its breath. She didn't say a word, didn't need to. Her decision had already begun to form, quiet and inevitable as dawn. Moral reflection soft. Sometimes peace isn't the absence of war. It's the space between who you were and who you might need to become again. Why did her lesson start feeling different? At first, no one noticed. The words sounded the same, calm, precise, practical, but underneath something had changed. Rachel Moore wasn't just teaching maintenance anymore. She was teaching survival. Her students didn't see it right away. They thought she was showing them how to inspect the Apache's hydraulic systems, how to balance torque ratios, how to listen for pressure shifts in the turbine pitch. But hidden inside every demonstration was something else, small lessons in awareness, adaptability, and calm under fire. "Don't rush the process," she'd say softly, adjusting a young technician's grip on a tool. "Machines panic when you do." They'd laugh, not understanding the deeper meaning. But Rachel knew. She wasn't just training technicians. She was building something that would outlast her, a generation that wouldn't freeze when the world turned hostile. Because somewhere out there, a name from her past was still breathing. And the world had no idea what that meant. The base had returned to routine, but routine never sat comfortably on Rachel anymore. She'd go through the motions, morning inspection, systems training, evening reports, but her eyes were different now. Calmer, colder. Every night, when the hangar emptied and the lights dimmed, she stayed. The folder Thomas had given her never left her sight. It sat on the table beside her, worn at the edges from too many nights of silent starring. Inside was that one highlighted name, a man who'd shared her rations, fought beside her, laughed under the same stars, and sold them all to the enemy. 23 good soldiers had died because of him. 23. She'd memorized the number the way people memorize prayers. Sometimes she'd whisper it under her breath when the wind howled through the hangar doors. Not out of rage, out of remembrance. The young technician, Henderson, had started staying late too. At first to help clean up, then to ask questions, then just to be near the quiet. He admired her in the way students sometimes do when they recognize integrity in someone they can't yet understand. "Ma'am," he said one night, wiping grease off his hands, "when you were in the field, what kept you calm?" Rachel didn't answer right away. She watched the desert through the open doors, the sky shifting from gold to indigo. "Understanding what panic costs," she said finally. "People think courage is loud. It's not. It's quiet. It's making choices after fear's already moved in." Henderson nodded slowly. "You think you'll ever go back out there?" Her eyes stayed on the horizon. "I never left." He didn't understand what she meant. Not yet, but one day he would. A week later, during class, she began incorporating new drills. "Power failure scenarios," she said, setting a timer. "Every minute you take to reset a system is a minute someone might be bleeding." Her tone was sharper now, more focused. The students scrambled through simulated failures, sweat mixing with oil and dust. When the alarm buzzed, she cut the noise with a single raised hand. "Reset," she ordered calmly. "Do it again." They obeyed, every move quicker, cleaner, more deliberate. She was shaping them, even if they didn't realize it, turning routine into instinct. Later, when one of them asked why she pushed so hard, she said quietly, "Because someday, someone will depend on your calm the way 12 souls depended on mine." It wasn't pride in her voice. It was burden. Thomas visited often now, but always at dusk, always alone. Each time, he brought updates she hadn't asked for but couldn't ignore. They found more traces of him, he said one evening, setting a map on her workbench. Satellite confirms he's coordinating supply lines in northern Syria, using the same dead-drop networks from Black Sand. Rachel studied the terrain markings, valleys, ridgelines, wind corridors she knew by heart. Still using his old routes, she murmured, predictable. Thomas nodded. Predictable men are the most dangerous. They believe their pattern is safety. He hesitated, then added softly, Langley's debating whether to greenlight a strike. Will they? She asked. He looked at her, expression unreadable. They don't have the shooter. Rachel's eyes lifted, meeting his. The silence that followed was heavy, full of what neither dared to say. I have students, she whispered finally. And they'll be fine, Thomas said. You've trained them well. That wasn't the point. She wasn't worried about them. She was worried about what she'd have to become again. That night, Henderson found her at the range. The lights were dim, the air still. Rachel stood prone behind a long-range rifle, the same M1007 she'd used during the officers' challenge weeks before. The barrel pointed toward a target barely visible against the desert horizon. She fired. Metal pinged, perfect hit. The rifle's echo rolled away into the dark. Can't sleep, he asked gently. Just checking calibration, she said. He looked at her setup, no digital readouts, no wind meter. At this hour. Rachel reloaded. Machines fail, instinct does. He watched her body settle into perfect stillness again, a control so absolute it almost frightened him. When she fired the second round, the sound split the night cleanly. Another hit, 2,000 meters. He'd trained marksmen before, but this was different. There was something spiritual in her precision, like she wasn't shooting bullets but truth. After the third shot, she looked over her shoulder. You should get some rest, Henderson. He hesitated. Why do you still practice? Rachel's eyes softened. Because the desert never forgets. The weeks passed like the hush before a storm. Rachel's classes grew larger, her students sharper. Even the officers who once dismissed her began sitting quietly in the back, taking notes like children before a sage. But with every day that passed, Rachel felt time thinning, stretching toward an inevitability she couldn't escape. Her husband knew it too. He didn't press her. He just waited. Then one morning, he walked in with news that changed everything. They've located him, he said quietly. He's planning something big. Civilian contractors, aid workers, Americans. The window to stop it is closing. Rachel's rags stilled on the helicopter hull. Is there a team? He hesitated. There could be if you light it. She didn't move, didn't breathe, just kept her hand on the cold metal beneath her fingers. Finally, she said, I told you I was done. Thomas nodded slowly. I know, but sometimes maintenance isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about removing what's dangerous. He left her with that thought. It lingered long after the sound of his footsteps faded. That night the base slept. Rachel didn't. She walked the tarmac in silence, her boots whispering against concrete. The moon hung low, pale and watchful. She stopped beside the Apache, the one she'd nearly died in. Its repaired hull gleamed faintly under floodlights. Her reflection stared back from the glass of the cockpit, tired eyes, steady hands, the faint scar on her forehead still visible. The face of someone who wanted peace, but understood war too well to trust it. She touched the metal gently. You and me again, huh? The wind answered, lifting sand in soft spirals. She took that as a yes. The next morning, she returned to class like nothing had changed. But her eyes were sharper, her tone quieter, her movements deliberate. Today, she said, we'll cover emergency field repair procedures. You'll think it's about hydraulics. It's not. It's about how to keep something alive long enough to save someone else. Her students didn't fully grasp the weight of that lesson, but they obeyed her instructions with the kind of focus she always commanded. When Henderson managed a near-perfect calibration under pressure, she nodded approvingly. Good. Remember, small errors become big failures when fear takes over. He smiled faintly. You sound like you're talking about people, not machines. Rachel gave a small smile in return. Maybe there's no difference. That night she wrote a letter. No one saw it, no one would. It wasn't addressed to Thomas or to Command. It was for her students. If they found it after she left, it would simply say, "What you build matters, what you save matters more. And when the time comes, don't wait for orders. Do what's right even if it's quiet, especially if it's quiet." She folded it, sealed it, and placed it inside her maintenance log, the same one she used every day, so no one would think to look. Then she returned to the range. This time she wasn't alone. Henderson and two of the other students were already there, rifles laid out, practicing the long-range exercises she'd introduced weeks before. Rachel watched them silently, pride mixing with sorrow. They'd come so far. When they noticed her, they straightened immediately. "Evening, ma'am," Henderson said. "We thought we'd keep practicing." "Good," she said softly. "Keep at it." She joined them without ceremony, setting her rifle beside theirs. Under her guidance, their breathing steadied, their aim improved, their confidence grew. Hours passed without words, only the sound of precise shots, each one ringing like a heartbeat in the dark. When Henderson finally asked, "Why are you teaching us this? We're maintenance, not combat." Rachel's answer was simple. "Because someday, someone will need to take a shot that matters, and I won't always be here." He didn't ask what she meant. The look in her eyes told him not to. As dawn approached, the horizon burned gold again. The base woke slowly, unaware that the woman who changed everything was preparing for one final act of repair. The file was still on her desk, the name still highlighted. The mission wasn't revenge. It was maintenance, removing a danger before it could destroy more lives. She packed her bag quietly, a clean rifle, minimal gear, no insignia. At the hangar door she paused, looking back once. Rows of students, the Apache, the desert. All of it glowing softly in first light. She whispered, "Keep them flying." Then stepped into the sun. Moral reflection soft. Some repairs can't wait for orders. Because sometimes, fixing the world means getting your hands dirty one last time. How many times can a person come back from the dead? Rachel Moore didn't know. But as the transport jet sliced through the night sky, the thought wouldn't leave her. Outside, the desert stretched endless, black and silent under the stars. Inside, red lights pulsed across metal walls, painting everything in muted blood tones. The hum of the engines was steady, but inside her chest her heartbeat was. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not again. Not after what happened at Firebase Artemis. But some ghosts don't stay buried, not when the past keeps breathing. Across from her, Thomas sat quietly, scanning mission data on a tablet. His expression was unreadable, professional, detached. But she knew him too well. The tension in his jaw, the slow rhythm of his breath, he was worried. They hadn't spoken much since takeoff. There wasn't anything left to say. Every word between them had already been said in another life, whispered before firefights, mumbled between nightmares. Finally, Thomas broke the silence. "Last chance to walk away." Rachel stared out the window. "You think I would have boarded if I wanted to?" He almost smiled. "Didn't think so." The mission brief was simple on paper: find the traitor, intercept the shipment, neutralize the network. But simple on paper rarely meant simple in the dirt. The man they were after, Major Alan Rees, had been one of their own. Once he'd been her superior, her mentor, her friend. He'd saved her life in Kandahar, shared cigarettes in silence during blackout nights, and once told her, "You'll outlast us all, Rachel, because you still feel something." She had believed him. And then, years later, she'd watched 23 names vanish into dust because of his betrayal. Now he was out there, running ghost operations through front companies, moving weapons disguised as medical supplies, selling lives for numbers. That's what betrayal costs, numbers pretending to be lives. They landed at a forward outpost near the Syrian border, a cluster of camouflaged tents buried in dunes. No insignia, no paperwork, just whispers and men who didn't ask names. Rachel stepped out first, boots sinking into sand still warm from the day's heat. The air smelled of fuel, dust, and something older, the memory of war. Thomas followed, handing her a headset. Command calls this Operation Silent Dusk. Extraction window, 24 hours. No backup until exfil point. Rachel nodded once. Who's on the ground? Local asset, goes by Malik, knows the terrain, not the mission. Thomas hesitated, then added, Rachel, if this goes wrong. It won't. You know I'll have to deny involvement. She gave a small, humorless smile. Wouldn't expect anything else. Malik was waiting by a convoy jeep, face hidden behind a scarf, eyes sharp. When he saw Rachel, he gave a small nod of acknowledgement, not respect, exactly, but recognition. People who have seen war know it when it walks toward them. Your accent, he said softly, American but not a soldier. Rachel tilted her head slightly. I used to be. He smirked. Used to be means you still are, you just don't like paperwork. She almost smiled, something like that. He started the engine, and the jeep rolled into the endless dark. No headlights, just the glow of instruments reflecting off their faces. Sand whispered against the wheels like secrets. The night was alive, distant gunfire, the hum of drones, the low cry of wind across empty miles. Hours later, they reached a ridge overlooking a compound, concrete walls, floodlights, armed sentries. Rachel raised her binoculars, scanning the perimeter, trucks, generators, satellite uplinks. Reyes had built himself a fortress. Entry points, she asked. Malik pointed to the east wall. Maintenance tunnel, small but unguarded, for fuel lines. Rachel lowered the binoculars. Maintenance, she murmured, figures. The plan formed quietly in her mind, not rushed, not reckless. She was good at this part, always had been. People thought combat was chaos. It was. It was rhythm. And she'd learned to dance with it. At 200 hours she moved. Night wrapped around her like an old uniform. Her gear was stripped down, black fatigues, silenced sidearm, custom rifle slung low. Every motion was economical, precise. She reached the tunnel entrance without sound. The metal grate resisted, creaked once, she froze, then shifted quietly free. The tunnel smelled of oil and sand. She moved through it on hands and knees, slow and deliberate. Every breath measured, every sound counted. When she emerged inside the compound, the air felt colder, electric. Security cameras swept rhythmically, left, pause, right. She timed her steps to the movement, slipping between shadows until she reached the inner yard. There the truck convoy. Crates stacked high, stamped with fake NGO logos. She opened one. Inside, weapon parts, explosive triggers, encrypted chips. Enough to turn a city into a headline. Her throat tightened. You've outdone yourself, Alan. The door behind her opened. Rachel spun, gun raised, but froze. A silhouette stepped into the light, older, thinner, but unmistakable. Alan Reyes. His once black hair now silver, his eyes calm, almost kind. I knew it would be you, he said. Rachel's finger trembled on the trigger. You sold us. He smiled faintly. I saved us. Her voice hardened. You murdered 23 soldiers. They were pawns, Rachel, sacrifices for a greater stability. You know how the game works. She stepped closer, gun steady. It was never a game. Rias sighed, hands loose at his sides. You think the world runs on loyalty. It runs on control, on leverage, on the willingness to do what others won't. Her jaw tightened. You sound like every coward who ever justified betrayal. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. Still the same, still righteous, still believing in dignity in a world that feeds on power. He smiled sadly. That's why I liked you. For a moment, silence. Just the hum of generators and the weight of shared history. Then Rachel whispered, you taught me to feel, I wish you hadn't. And fired. The sound was swallowed by the desert. She stood there a long time afterward, staring at the man who'd once been her mentor. There was no triumph in her expression, no relief, just a quiet, aching grief. Thomas's voice crackled softly in her earpiece. Status. Rachel exhaled slowly, objective complete. Copy that, extraction in 20. She looked around the compound at the crates, the maps, the computer systems. All threads in a web of corruption stretching beyond this place. Thomas, she said, voice low, if I leave this here, someone else will just take his place. I know. I can end it, all of it. The network, the supply lines, the funding. He hesitated. Rachel, if you do that, there's no coming back. She smiled faintly. There wasn't before. The next few minutes were quiet chaos. Rachel moved like a shadow through the compound, planting charges, corrupting data cores, rerouting transmissions. Every motion practiced, efficient, surgical. By the time the first explosion tore through the night, she was already on the ridge, watching it burn. Flames painted the horizon orange. The compound crumbled inward, one detonation at a time. No screams, no panic, just fire erasing the evidence of betrayal. Malik watched beside her, eyes wide. What was that place? Rachel's voice was steady, a lie. They drove away before the smoke faded, the glow still visible in the rearview mirror like a wound that refused to close. Extraction came at dawn. A black helicopter skimmed low, rotors cutting through dust and silence. Thomas leaned out, hand extended. Rachel climbed aboard without a word. As the helicopter rose, the compound disappeared behind them, smoke curling like ghosts into the sky. Thomas handed her a canteen. You did what they couldn't. Rachel took a sip, eyes on the horizon. I did what they wouldn't. He studied her a moment. You know this means they'll come after you, politically, quietly. She nodded. They already were. He smiled faintly, still not afraid. Rachel met his eyes. I learned a long time ago that fear doesn't stop you from dying. It just keeps you from living. Hours later, at the forward base, command debriefed her through encrypted channels. They wanted answers. Timelines, confirmations. They wanted to sanitize her choices into neat reports. But Rachel refused to give them what they wanted. When they asked, why destroy the data, she simply said, because truth doesn't belong in cages. They didn't know what to do with her after that. They never did. That night she sat outside her tent, looking at the stars. The desert wind was gentle now, as if trying to apologize for everything it had witnessed. Thomas joined her quietly, 2 mugs of bitter coffee in his hands. He passed her one. For what it's worth, he said, I think you did the right thing. Rachel took a slow sip. That's the problem with the right thing, it never feels like it. He leaned back, eyes on the fading horizon. You going back to the States? She didn't answer. Instead, she looked down at her scarred hands, the calluses, the faint tremor that only came when she was finally still. Maybe, I've got students waiting. Thomas smiled. They'll be proud. Rachel looked at him, eyes soft, voice low. They'll never know. Morning came quietly. The sun rose over the dunes, turning the wrecked horizon gold. The air smelled of smoke and metal, and something new, peace maybe. Rachel stood alone by the edge of camp, watching the sand drift over faint tire tracks. In a few hours, the desert would erase every sign that she'd ever been there. That was the way she liked it. Thomas approached one last time. They'll call it unsanctioned, they'll bury it. Rachel nodded. Good, some truths don't need names. He looked at her for a long moment. So what now? She smiled faintly. Now, I go back to cleaning helicopters. He laughed soft, genuine. You're impossible. She turned to face the sunrise. No, just unfinished. When she returned to base weeks later, her students barely recognized her at first. She was thinner, quieter. But when she walked into the hangar, every sound stopped. Henderson stepped forward, eyes wide. Ma'am, we thought you were. Gone, she said. Not yet. They crowded around her, full of questions she didn't answer. She just smiled faintly and gestured toward the Apache. Well, she said, are you keeping her clean? Henderson grinned through tears. Like she's alive, ma'am. Rachel nodded. Good, she is. And just like that, the rhythm returned. Tools, grease, laughter, life. Except now, every person in that hangar moved with a little more respect. A little more awareness of the quiet miracle they worked beside. That night when everyone was gone, Rachel stayed behind. She sat on the wing of the Apache, legs swinging gently above the floor, watching dust dance in the last shafts of light. She whispered softly, almost to herself. It's never really about revenge, it's about repair. The hangar was silent, except for the hum of cooling metal. Sometimes, silence is the only applause heroes ever get. Moral reflection soft. Some wounds don't heal, they transform. And in their quiet ache, they remind us why we still choose to fix what others abandon. Why did everyone go quiet when she entered the briefing room? Rachel Moore didn't look around. She could feel the tension before she saw it. Whispers, glances, the stillness that falls when truth walks through a room built on politics. The colonel cleared his throat. Sergeant Moore, sit. Not Night Viper, not even ma'am. Just Sergeant. Rachel took her seat at the far end of the table. The room smelled of coffee and paper, bureaucratic war. On the screen behind the colonel, satellite images flickered. The burned compound, the cratered ground, the red overlay of explosions. This, he said, is what remains of Site 29. The Pentagon wants to know how an unregistered operative penetrated it, neutralized multiple targets, and disappeared before any Allied forces arrived. He turned, eyes sharp. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? Rachel folded her hands calmly. Should I? A pause. Silence stretched like a wire. Thomas sat 2 seats away, expression stone flat. He wasn't supposed to be there, but someone had insisted on logistical continuity. The colonel leaned forward. You were seen boarding an unmarked aircraft, same night, same coordinates. Rachel met his stare. Then whoever saw that should get a medal for good eyesight. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the room, not approval but respect disguised as amusement. The colonel's jaw flexed. You think this is funny, Sergeant? No, she said softly, just predictable. The hearing lasted 2 hours. They questioned, she deflected. They accused, she stayed calm. In the end, they had no evidence, no footage, no traceable orders. Just a legend they couldn't prosecute. When it was over, the colonel sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Fine, no charges, but unofficially, Sergeant Moore, your days of quiet are over. Rachel stood, voice calm. They never were. Thomas caught up with her outside the tent, the wind whipping dust between them. You handled that well. She smirked faintly. Handled what? A meeting? I've been through worse storms. He hesitated, then said, "They're going to keep watching you." "I hope so," she said. "Maybe they'll learn something." Back in the hangar, life moved on, or at least pretended to. The younger mechanics returned to their checklists, tools clanging against metal, but the air carried new reverence. Even the walls seemed to know they stood in the shadow of something larger. Henderson approached, clipboard in hand. "They said we're up for deployment maintenance drills, forward base rotation." Rachel nodded. "Good, you'll learn faster in the field." He hesitated. "You're coming too, right?" Rachel looked past him, out toward the tarmac where a new Apache waited, unscarred, eager. "Maybe," she said, "maybe not." He frowned. "But you're the reason we—" She stopped him gently. "Henderson, nobody's the reason. We all just hold the line until someone else can take it." He didn't understand then, but later he would. Weeks blurred into rhythm. Engine, sand, sweat. Rachel trained her team harder now, not cruelly, just precisely. She taught them to listen to machinery, the way soldiers listen to silence before an ambush. She taught them how to improvise under pressure, how to stay human when orders stopped making sense. Sometimes, during those long desert evenings, she'd watch them laughing, real laughter this time, and feel something she hadn't in years. Hoping. Then she'd turn away, because hope was dangerous. It made you want to stay. Command sent inspectors, quiet men with polished shoes and too many questions. They lingered around her hangar, taking notes they didn't understand. "Sergeant Moore," one said, "why are you running live simulations for non-combat personnel?" "Because war doesn't ask job titles," she replied. He frowned. "You're overstepping your directive." She smiled faintly. "Maybe the directive's too small." They left, irritated and confused. Her students stayed, more loyal than ever. One night a storm rolled in from the west. Winds howled across the desert, rattling the hangar doors. The power flickered, then died. Rachel lit a lantern and sat alone by the Apache, the glow wrapping her in amber light. Thomas appeared, soaked with rain, holding a folder wrapped in plastic. "Got something from Langley," he said, setting it down. She didn't open it. "Another mission." "Another consequence," he corrected. They traced funding trails from Rias's operation. Someone inside the Pentagon kept the money flowing. Rachel exhaled slowly. So it wasn't just him. "Never is." He studied her for a moment. "They want you to testify." She looked up sharply. "Against them?" He nodded. "They're afraid of what you know." Rachel chuckled, a dry, bitter sound. "Good fear's healthy." Thomas sighed. "You could walk away, you know. No more hearings, no more ghosts, just teach live." Rachel's eyes softened. "You still don't get it, this is living." The hearing came 2 weeks later. Different room, different faces, same politics. This time, Rachel didn't hide. She walked in wearing her maintenance uniform. No medals, no rank patches, no makeup, just truth. When they asked her why she disobeyed protocol, she said, "Because protocol protects systems, not people." When they asked if she regretted it, she said, "I regret every life lost before I learned to stop asking permission." When they warned her about consequences, she said, "Consequences are what happen when you finally do something that matters." The chamber fell silent. Even the air seemed to hesitate. Someone whispered, "She talks like she's already free." They were right. Back at base, things changed quietly. The younger mechanics started keeping her sayings written on toolboxes. "Machines panic when you do. Respect keeps them flying. Fix what's dangerous." They turned her lessons into creed. And in time, her hangar became more than a workplace. It became a refuge for the broken, the exhausted, the ones who still believed in quiet courage. Rachel never asked for that. She just accepted it. Because some legacies choose you. One evening, Henderson found her sitting outside, watching the sunset bleed across the sky. He hesitated before speaking. "They promoted me, lead technician for Bravo Wing." Rachel smiled. "You earned it." "I'm not sure I'm ready." "You never are," she said gently. "That's what makes you careful." He looked down, voice low. "Ma'am, when you were flying that day, were you scared?" She thought about it, really thought. "Terrified," she admitted. "But fear isn't the enemy, complacency is." He nodded slowly. "You think we'll ever get to where you are?" Rachel looked at him, eyes kind. "God, I hope not. The world only needs one of me." That night she wrote another letter, short, almost cryptic. "If the system fails you, build another. And if the world laughs, fix it anyway." She left it in Henderson's locker without signing it. He'd know who it was from. Months passed. The investigations died quietly. The whispers faded. Rachel became something else. Not a soldier, not a technician, not even a legend. She became the steady hum of purpose that outlasted every rank and rumor. But Thomas knew it couldn't last forever. He showed up one morning with tired eyes and that same unmarked SUV. "They're closing the program," he said. "Budget cuts, politics." Rachel didn't react. "Of course they are. They'll reassign your people, split the hangar." She nodded once. "Then I guess we'll rebuild somewhere else." He looked at her, admiration mixed with sorrow. "You really don't stop, do you?" "Not when things still break," she said. The day they shut the hangar down, Rachel stood at attention as the soldiers removed her team's insignia from the wall, a small emblem the students had made. A wrench crossed with a rotor blade, the letters NV etched in the corner. Henderson tried to protest. "Ma'am, we can fight this." Rachel stopped him gently. "No, let them close doors, we'll open others." He blinked away frustration. "Where will you go?" She smiled faintly. "Where things still need fixing." And just like that, she walked out, no ceremony, no speech. Just quiet steps into the bright desert light. That night, Thomas found her on the airstrip, sitting cross-legged beside a decommissioned Apache, staring at the stars. "You could have stayed," he said. "I am staying," she replied, "just not here." He lowered himself beside her, the night wind cool on their faces. "You know, some people think you're dangerous." Rachel smiled. "Good, it means I'm still alive." They sat there in silence, the desert stretching endlessly around them. Finally, Thomas said, "If they ever asked what you are now, what would you tell them?" Rachel looked at him, eyes soft but unflinching. "I'm maintenance," she said, "just on a larger scale." When dawn came, the first light hit her face, and for the first time in years she looked peaceful. Not because the fight was over, but because she'd accepted that it never would be. She stood, brushed the dust from her uniform, and whispered, "Back to work." Moral reflection soft. Not all battles are fought with weapons. Some are fought with patience, the quiet, stubborn kind that keeps repairing the world even after it breaks you. Why did the radio go silent mid-transmission? Rachel Moore froze in the middle of a training session. Her hands, once steady on the maintenance schematics, stopped mid-draw. The sudden stillness of the hangar was louder than any alarm. Across the room, Henderson looked up from a diagnostic console. "Ma'am, something wrong." Rachel's eyes flicked toward the comms unit on the wall. The static wasn't random. It was the kind she'd heard before, controlled, coded, almost familiar. She walked over, turned the dial. A faint voice bled through the noise. "Base hit, rotor out, taking fire. Bravo wing down." Then silence. For a long second, no one moved. Then Henderson whispered, "That's our unit." Rachel didn't respond. She didn't have to. The look in her eyes said it all. 2 months had passed since the hangar was shut down. Her team had been reassigned, scattered across forward bases as support staff, non-combatants according to the new reorganization. She warned command that cutting corners on readiness would cost them. Now, somewhere out in the desert, it had. Rachel's jaw tightened. Get me the coordinates. Ma'am, command hasn't authorized. She shot Henderson a look that silenced him instantly. Coordinates, now. He hesitated only a second before relaying through a side channel. The reply came back broken but clear enough. Grid 7Q Bravo, Deep Desert. No reinforcements inbound. Rachel exhaled slowly. Then she reached for her jacket. The unmarked Jeep roared to life outside, kicking up waves of sand. Henderson jumped into the passenger seat before she could stop him. "You're not coming," she said. "Ma'am, with respect." "No." But he didn't move. "You said yourself, fix what's dangerous. You trained us to act, not wait." Rachel stared at him, torn between pride and fury. Then she gave a sharp nod. "Fine, but you follow orders, every single one." He grinned faintly. "Yes, ma'am." The Jeep tore across the dunes, the horizon burning gold under a rising sun. The coordinates led them to a canyon, jagged cliffs, deep shadows. Smoke curled from below, faint but unmistakable. Rachel parked on the ridge, binoculars raised. Down in the ravine, a downed helicopter lay smoking, its rotor blades twisted, tail snapped clean off. 3 figures took cover behind rocks, pinned by small arms fire from the ridge opposite. Henderson swallowed hard. "That's Bravo Wing, 2 pilots and a tech crew." Rachel's voice was steady. "Not if we wait much longer." He looked at her, realizing what she intended. "Ma'am, we don't have weapons." She reached under her seat, pulled out a compact rifle wrapped in canvas. "I do." He blinked. "You planned this." Rachel loaded the magazine with mechanical calm. "I planned for everything." They moved down the canyon, hugging the rock wall. Bullets cracked overhead, sharp, snapping echoes bouncing between cliffs. Henderson's breathing quickened. Rachel grabbed his wrist mid-step, whispering, "Breathe slower. Fear speeds up your pulse. You need it steady." He nodded, matching his breath to hers. "Inhale, hold, exhale." She taught him that in the hangar months ago, not realizing it might one day save him here. When they reached the wreck, the pilots' faces lit up in disbelief. "Ma'am, what the hell?" "No time," she cut in. "Status. Hydraulics gone, fuel leak, radio dead." "Can it fly?" One pilot laughed bitterly. "Fly, it's a coffin." Rachel crouched, eyes scanning the wreck. "Then let's rebuild the coffin." For the next 20 minutes, chaos became rhythm. Henderson fetched tools, crawled under the frame, patched lines with tape and sheer willpower. Rachel worked beside him, directing each movement like a conductor, commanding an orchestra of desperation. When the pilots offered to help, she snapped, "Cover us. You can thank me later." Every strike of her wrench, every hiss of leaking fluid felt like memory. Firebase Artemis. The Black Sand operation. Every broken machine she'd ever dragged back to life. "Try the auxiliary ignition," she said, sweat streaking her face. The pilot twisted the switch. Nothing. Rachel didn't blink. Again. Still nothing. She exhaled, eyes flicking to the hydraulic pump. "We bypassed the regulator. Risk of overheat." Henderson frowned. "Ma'am, that'll burn out the—" "Do it anyway." He obeyed. On the next attempt, the engine coughed, then caught. The rotors groaned, uneven at first, then smoother, alive. Rachel smiled faintly. "Not bad, old girl." Then gunfire ripped through the canyon again. A round ricocheted inches from her face. She ducked, dragging Henderson down. "2 shooters," she hissed. "Left ridge." He nodded, trembling. "What do we—" She handed him the rifle. "You trained for this." "Ma'am, I'm not." "Yes, you are." He froze. The sound of bullets tearing stone filled the air. Rachel pressed his shoulder gently. "Aim for the rhythm, not the noise. Control your breath. You've done this before." And somehow he believed her. Henderson leaned into the rock, steadying the rifle. One shot cracked through the canyon. A body dropped. His hands shook, but his breathing stayed calm. Rachel nodded. Good, now the other one. He fired again. Silence. The canyon was still. The pilot stared in shock. That kid just... Rachel cut them off. No time, get her in the air. The helicopter roared, fighting gravity. Dust exploded upward, stinging eyes and skin. Rachel shoved Henderson toward the door. Go. He turned. You're coming too, right? She hesitated, the first time he'd ever seen her uncertain. Then she looked up the ridge, where smoke still rose. Not yet. Ma'am. She gave him a faint smile. Someone has to make sure she really flies. He wanted to argue, but the look in her eyes told him not to. The helicopter lifted, blades chopping the dawn. Rachel stood below, hair whipping in the wind, watching her students disappear into safety. When the last echo faded, she turned toward the ridge. 2 insurgents remained, one wounded, one running. Rachel moved like instinct. No hesitation, no anger, just purpose. She caught the wounded one first, disarmed him with fluid efficiency. No words, no cruelty, just dispassionate precision. The other reached for his radio. She fired once, clean, controlled. Then silence again. She stood there for a long time, breathing hard, sweat and dust streaking her face. The canyon was littered with smoke and echoes. The kind of silence that makes you remember what it costs to keep people alive. Hours later, the evac helicopter arrived. Rachel didn't wait for orders. She climbed aboard and sat quietly by the window, staring at the dunes sliding past below. Across from her, Henderson watched her in awe, equal parts gratitude and disbelief. He finally spoke. Ma'am, you saved us. Rachel shook her head slightly. You saved yourselves, I just gave you the tools. He swallowed. You came back for us. Her eyes stayed on the horizon. That's what teachers do. Back at base, command scrambled to rewrite the narrative. Reports called it an unauthorized rescue. Others called it a miracle. The truth lived somewhere between the two. Rachel refused interviews, refused medals. When they tried to brief her on disciplinary hearings, she just smiled. You can't court-martial a ghost. The colonel sighed. You really enjoy making my job difficult. She looked up. No, sir, I just prefer making it meaningful. Henderson and the surviving pilots were reassigned again, this time as instructors. Command didn't admit it out loud, but Rachel's methods had worked. Her philosophy, train for chaos, prepare for silence, fix under fire, had saved more lives than protocol ever could. Within weeks, they started calling it the Moore Doctrine. Unofficial, unwritten, whispered between mechanics and soldiers alike. Respect keeps them flying. Fix what's dangerous. Fear doesn't stop you from dying, it stops you from living. Her words became survival codes. One afternoon, Rachel stood outside the hangar watching her students, now instructors, teach new recruits. They moved with precision, calm confidence. She could see herself in them, not their movements but their quiet certainty. Thomas walked up behind her, hands in his pockets. Looks like you built an army without firing a shot. Rachel smiled faintly. Not an army, a culture. He studied her for a long moment. You know, they'll write books about you someday. Then I've failed, she said, because real work isn't supposed to make headlines. That night she sat alone by the Apache again. Same ritual, same quiet. She ran her hand along the cold metal, whispering, You did good. In the reflection of the glass, she saw her own face, older, softer, but still unbroken. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel haunted. She felt fulfilled. The radio on the bench crackled once, faint static, then a familiar voice, Henderson's. Base secure, Bravo wing stabilized, Maintenance systems green. You were right, ma'am, machines panic when we do. Rachel smiled, tears glinting in her eyes. Good boy. She switched off the radio. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of sand and fuel. The world kept spinning. New soldiers arrived, old ghosts faded. But one truth lingered, carved into the silence she left behind. Sometimes the strongest leaders aren't the ones who command. They're the ones who repair. Moral reflection soft. Legacy isn't the medals they give you. It's the calm that lives on in others when you're gone. Why was her locker empty? The hangar was quiet that morning, too quiet. The air smelled of metal polish and dust, the kind that settles after years of work, years of wait. Rachel Moore stood in front of her open locker, hands resting on the door. Inside, nothing but a folded uniform and a photo, faded, edges worn. Her and Thomas, somewhere green and alive, long before sand became home. She didn't remember putting the picture there. Maybe Henderson had. He was thoughtful like that, always watching, always learning. A voice echoed from behind her. They said you're leaving. Rachel didn't turn. They said right. Henderson stepped into view, clipboard under his arm. He looked different now, confident, steady. His uniform was crisp, his insignia new, but his eyes were still the same. The same nervous kid who once fumbled with wrenches and doubted his own worth. Where will you go? He asked quietly. Rachel smiled faintly, somewhere quiet. He swallowed. You built all this, ma'am. The training programs, the doctrine, the discipline. You can't just walk away. I'm not walking away, she said. I'm walking forward. He hesitated, then offered a small envelope. They gave me this for you, official retirement packet. She took it, glanced once, then tucked it into her jacket without opening it. They always loved paperwork more than people. He smiled despite himself. You sure you're ready for civilian life? Rachel looked at him for a long moment, eyes soft, unreadable. I've been ready for years. I just needed the world to catch up. The sun climbed higher, pouring gold across the hangar floor. Every sound seemed magnified, a dropped wrench, a distant rotor, a laugh echoing down the corridor. Rachel walked slowly through the space, fingertips brushing each workstation. Every tool, every scratch on the benches told a story. The young crew stopped what they were doing as she passed. No one saluted. No one spoke. They just stood, quiet acknowledgement from those who understood what words could never say. Henderson followed her to the Apache. The one she'd rebuilt, crashed, and rebuilt again. Its paint had dulled. The stenciled name beneath the cockpit read, NV-01. Rachel ran her hand across the hull, still flying. Every day, Henderson said, just like you taught us. She smiled faintly, then she'll outlast me. Outside, Thomas waited by the SUV. Same one. Same faint scar on the hood from years ago. He watched her approach, expression somewhere between pride and sorrow. You really going through with it? He asked. Rachel nodded. Time to let the quiet win for once. He studied her face, the lines etched deeper, the eyes softer but still sharp. You could have been anything, you know, general, consultant, politician even. She snorted softly. Politicians fix speeches, I fix things that matter. He smiled. That's why I married you. Her expression gentled. And why you lost me to this place. Thomas's shoulders sank. You never belonged to this place, Rachel, you built it. She looked past him toward the hangar, where her students, her family, were still watching from the doorway. I just cleaned it, she said softly. Everyone else made it shine. They drove in silence for a while, desert stretching endlessly, horizon glowing white. Thomas's hand stayed steady on the wheel, but his voice was, You'll miss it. Rachel gazed out the window. Every sound, every smell, every broken bolt. He laughed under his breath. You're impossible. I know. The desert rolled by, dunes like frozen waves, wind carrying whispers of a life that had finally stopped fighting to prove itself. For the first time in years, she wasn't on a mission. No orders, no briefings, no enemies. Just quiet. And it terrified her. They stopped by an overlook, a wide ridge that dropped into an endless sea of gold. Rachel stepped out, letting the wind whip her hair across her face. Below, the base shimmered faintly in the distance, small, fragile, human. She closed her eyes. Every sound came back in fragments, the laughter, the shouting, the whine of engines warming before dawn. And over it all, the steady hum of a heart that never stopped working. Thomas joined her. You could go back, teach at West Point, write manuals, they'd listen now. Rachel smiled faintly. The ones who need it most don't read manuals. He chuckled, you're probably right. She turned toward him, expression soft but resolute. They'll be fine. Henderson, the kids, they know what matters now. Thomas raised a brow. And what's that? Rachel looked back at the base one last time. That machines don't need heroes, they need caretakers. They reached the main road at dusk. The SUV's shadow stretched long across the sand. Thomas finally broke the silence. So where to now? Rachel shrugged. I heard a small flight school, looking for an instructor. Civilian birds, nothing fancy. Maybe I'll teach them how to listen before they fly. He smiled. That sounds like peace. She laughed quietly. Peace is overrated, but purpose I can live with. He glanced at her, eyes crinkling, still talking like a soldier. Maybe soldiers are just people who never stopped repairing things. Months later, Henderson found a letter in his locker, no return address, no stamp. The handwriting was neat, steady. Don't wait for the world to understand you. Fix it anyway. Lord. He stood there a long time, holding the paper like a relic. Then he smiled, not sadly, but with the quiet certainty of someone who finally understood what legacy really meant. Back in a hangar hundreds of miles away, Rachel stood beside a small civilian helicopter, teaching two young pilots how to run pre-flight checks. They were nervous, green, distracted. Slow down, she said gently. Listen to it. The engine will tell you what's wrong if you stop trying to talk over it. They looked at her blankly. She chuckled softly. You'll get it. She handed one of them a rag. Here, wipe it down. Always leave a machine cleaner than you found it. As they obeyed, she walked toward the open doors. The sunset poured fire across the clouds. The rotors clicked lazily in the breeze. For a moment she let herself smile, really smile, without guilt or caution. The world was still broken. But so was she. And somehow that balance made sense. That night she sat outside the hangar, legs crossed, staring at the sky. The stars were brighter out here, quieter, more honest. She thought about everyone she'd met. The ones she'd saved. The ones she couldn't. And the ones who learned to save themselves. She thought about the girl who once stood alone in a hangar full of laughter, the maintenance tech no one took seriously. The girl who cleaned, because it was all she could do to keep her hands from shaking. That girl was gone now. But the lesson she left behind was, sometimes you clean a thing because it's dirty. And sometimes because it's sacred. In the distance, she heard a faint roar, jet engines far away, heading east. She didn't turn to watch. She just smiled, whispering to herself. They're flying. The next morning, one of the students found her workbench. On it sat her old patch, the one that had once silenced an entire hangar with a single glance. It was faded now, threads worn, colors dulled. Beneath it lay a small metal tag, engraved with 4 words. Respect keeps them flying. No note, no signature. Just that. The student picked it up carefully, turning it over in his hands, and understood immediately. It wasn't a farewell. It was an instruction. Weeks later, across bases and continents, word of her quiet departure spread through whispers and small stories. Some said she'd retired to the desert. Some swore she worked as a pilot instructor in Arizona. Others believed she was helping veterans rebuild machines in forgotten corners of the world. No one knew for sure. But every hangar, every training camp, every mechanic who ever heard her name carried her lessons forward. In the low hum of an engine that refused to die. In the quiet confidence before a dangerous mission. In the silence between orders where courage really lives. Her legacy wasn't written on walls or medals. It was etched into the hands of those who refused to stop repairing the world, one broken thing at a time. Somewhere under an orange sky, Rachel Moore stood beside a running helicopter, hand on the glass, eyes half closed. "Still flying," she whispered. The wind lifted her hair, carried her words into the horizon. And for once she didn't feel small. She felt infinite. Moral reflection final. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts quietly, consistently, until even silence learns to stand at attention.